Alright, welcome back. So today we're going to be working on animation trees. We're going to blend together a upper body and lower body. We're also going to use the various movements that we have imported. Now if we hop into Godot here, I have a couple extra animations that I've already imported. We had the forward import from the last video, but I went ahead and imported a back, left, and right from Mixamo. You can use whatever you like, or you can make your own, but for the purposes of this tutorial, I did not go over or record that, as we already did that in the past episode. And so for future episodes, whenever I have a new animation that I need, I'll just go ahead and grab it and I'll say that I imported it. And if you want to know how, you just have to go back to the previous video. So today we're going to be going over animation trees. For this tutorial, we're going to be going over the first half, which is going to be all of the basics. And then the second half is going to be going over things like events, method calls, and functions and things of that nature. But for now, we've got the animation tree, so we have a couple of variables over here that we should probably go ahead and fill. So let's go ahead and set the animation player to animation player. We can't set active to on yet because we haven't selected a tree root. So these are your different options. Root node is just what everything else derives from. Blend tree is a pretty simple canvas that you can go ahead and add different things to, like animations, one-shots, ads, blends, state machines, things like that. We're going to be using this, but I'm going to get back to it. Let's go over the other things first. So the next one is blend space 1D, and this just gives you a horizontal blend between animations, and you can set them anywhere you like. And if you set up an animation here by selecting the little arrow, you can right click and add animation. So we'll just do forward import, and let's do back import over here on the left, and we can go ahead and hit on. Then if we blend between these, it will not exactly precisely, and ideally we would also have a idle here in the center, so that way the animation knows what to do when it's just sitting in the center. But now we can blend between these two animations. Next up is blend space 2D. So if we go ahead and select that, it's exactly like the 1D before, but you have 4 directions now. You can go in any direction you like, and this is going to be a little bit more like what we're going to do for our movement. So if we go ahead and add in a couple animations here. Now you can see if we go right, we've got running right, and if we go forward, we've got running forward, and that in between is actually handled by this. Now mind you, it's never going to look as good as if you actually have proper animations for that in between, but it doesn't look half bad. There's also something else you can do. If you select sync up here, it will attempt to sync all the animations together. And specifically with locomotion, I would highly suggest you do so, as long as their timing are all the same. That way, if the right foot is forward on one of these animations, it should be forward on all the other animations. This really lets you have a bit of a better blend between all of the different locomotions. Now, for Hermit specifically, I actually have a walking, which is another set of points here in between the others that it blends into when it's halfway between. And then I also, at some point, I'm going to be adding angular directions as well, just to clean up these animations. The more animations you add to a 2D blend, the better results you'll get. Next up, we have state machine. State machines are extremely useful for different types of states, as the name implies, and they can actually be used in blend trees. So if we add in, we have a couple options here. We can add in like a blend space 2D, and this blend space 2D can be our movement. And then we can add in perhaps an animation for waving, and then we can transition back and forth between these two states. So it stops moving, it performs the wave, and it comes back. Not exactly ideal, but there are ways to work around the inadequacies of this, but we're going to get to them in a moment. So for now, we're going to leave this as is. We're going to build another one inside of the blend tree later on. And then lastly, there is animation node animation, which is exactly what it sounds. All it does is just play a specific animation. If you want specifically extremely old school style where you just hard swap between the animations, this could actually be the way you want to go. That way you handle everything via code and you just hard swap between animations, no blending, like they did in the older games like Donkey Kong and things like that. But for now, we're going to go to blend tree. So within blend tree, you have only a single thing when you start. That's the output. This is where the animation that is being compiled, as it were, actually gets applied to the character. So if we go ahead and let's just create a blend space 2D. So we're going to add in, just like we did before, we're going to add in our animations. Let's add in a look around animation. All right. So if we just tie this into output and we start manipulating these variables 0 to 1 and to -1, we've got all of our different animations here. Set this to 1 as well. We set that to 1. So easily you can see how this would be used via code in order to actually move. However, to access it via code, you need to go up here to the parameters, blend space 2D, and that's it right there. So it's very handy when doing these things to rename them to names that make sense. I would highly suggest you do this later on for code, and even now it's good to get it in the habit of updating the names properly. But we're not going to be using just a blend space 2D. We've got a couple of other options. So if we go over here, we can actually do things like blend 2. We're going to go over what each of these things do. So first off, you have animation. That does exactly what you would expect. You can select whatever animation you like and you can drag it into output. So you can do left, you can do right. So that's how animation node works. So next up we have OneShot. So OneShot's a little bit different. It has kind of an idle animation or an idle state. You can say look around, and then it has what you want the animation to occur on a trigger. So let's do a wave animation. So if we set this into output, we have this right here, and it just keeps looking around doing nothing. But if we set to fire, it'll go ahead and play the animation of wave. You'll notice it's very jumpy. So OneShot is very useful specifically for forcing the animation into a specific action. So if you got injured or something and you wanted that to happen immediately with no blending, then maybe a OneShot would be the direction you want to go. You can also edit filters. So later on in blending, this will actually become more important. But for now, I'm going to go over it very simply. Filters allow the OneShot animation to only apply to certain bones. So let's say we only wanted to apply it to the hand. We don't want it to apply to the upper body or the torso. And I'm not going to mess with the fingers right now because it doesn't matter. We'll just select the top ones. All right. So if we select enable filtering right here. I forgot. So I selected the right hand only. So let's go ahead and select the left hand. All right, let's hit fire. Yeah, there we go. So you can see how the waving works independent of the rest of the body. The rest of the body is already doing something and the waving applies over it. So this is how we're going to be blending later on the upper body to the lower body. Next up is add to. So this is pretty simple and it can work for very specific types of blends. You have to be careful with this because adding animations can be a bit wonky at times. So if we add in, for example, let's add in waving. So if we put this into output, we're running and we've got 0% of wave. So you can see it's trying to add that in. This obviously is not ideal. You can see how it's clipping through the body. So basically it adds in the animation that you've selected, but since it's additive, it can be a bit wonky at times. It's adding what the changes are. So for example, T-pose here isn't actually changing from the base pose, so it doesn't really help you any to add it back in because it's basically just a nothing pose. So if you hit look around, for example, look around can add in, but its results are not exactly ideal. So moving on, I don't use add much, but you can use it for subtleties. So if you wanted to, if you had a couple animations that were like leans or hunches over, so if the character was tired or something like that, you could add that animation in without really affecting anything else, and that might be very useful for you. So next up, we're going to go over blends. So add 3 is the same thing as add 2, but with 3 variables. So blend 2 and blend 3 are once again the same thing, but with 3 variables. So if we go ahead and select this to output, let's real quick, we're going to go ahead and actually create a locomotion here. So we're going to have locomotion blend space, and we're going to name these locomotion and upper body blend. So if we put that in there, let's go ahead and add in the animations. So what I went ahead and did was I created a OneShot in the blend. So I'm going to set this to wave animation, and then the top one, I'm just going to set it to look around. Okay, so now we have the locomotion on the bottom. So if we just move this to whatever we like, we can do locomotion, and we'll just set it to something like that. So now it's kind of running off to the side. Now if we go over here, we blend between these two, it just blends the whole body. But once again, we do have filters. So if we go up to filters, enable filtering, let's go ahead and select everything from the chest up. So now we have everything from the chest up. So if we blend, you'll notice just the chest up is playing that animation. And we can go ahead and fire the one shot for waving. Now this is obviously still very jerky, and that's not exactly ideal. We can do other things with state machines within this blend tree, but we're not going to get to that quite yet. First, we're going to go over the rest of the different things. So TimeSeek lets you actually start an animation from a different point. So you can start it from any point within the animation. This can be handy if you have perhaps a single animation with multiple sub animations within it. You can have them broke up using the TimeSeek function. I haven't used the TimeSeek node, but I probably will in the future, specifically for impacts. Next up, we also have TimeScale. So TimeScale I have used pretty liberally. TimeScale I use mostly for locomotion. So if we go ahead and drag this into in, we have our normal locomotion, but we can now speed up just the feet. And you'll notice the head is still turning around at the same speed it was. Now this does look a little cartoonish, but the upside is that everything else functions at normal speed. So the wave functions at normal speed. So we'll set that back to 1. We are going to leave this in here though, because I actually really like having that in the locomotion. Next up, we also have a couple other options. We have transition. So it lets you tie in to different animations in the inputs, and you can add as many states as you like and then transition between them. So it's kind of like OneShot, but a little bit more close to a state machine. So if we set this right here, so as you can see, this lets you switch between different states. And the nice thing about transition is that it actually functions like a proper state machine, so you can do things like have a 0.5 second delay, or blend rather. You see how the hands move much smoother back and forth. And then also you have other options like auto advance back to state 0. So if you set it to state 1, it'll play through, and then once it is done, it'll blend right back to state 0. So think of it as a softer one-shot, but the upside to transition is you can have multiple states here and you can access them via code. You don't have to just have 2. So you can go over to the transition and you can, via the transition, you can request different states. Haven't actually used this because normally I just use a state machine, but I may actually use it in the future for different things. So we're going to go ahead and delete that. Speaking of which, we have a couple blend trees here, which you already know, and we also have a state machine. So we're going to go ahead and use a state machine for the upper body because state machines are extremely powerful, and I like using them whenever we have something like an upper body where we want to do different actions with it. So we'll go ahead and drag that into blend, and right now he's trying to fly. So we'll just call this upper body state machine. All right. So once you're in here, if you hit open editor, you get what the state machine was before. So we can do things like playing an animation for looking around and playing an animation for waving. What we need to do is we need to have a transition from start to look around, or start to whatever your default animation is. You just click and drag using the little arrow to set it to look around. Now look around will keep looping. What we do want to do is have the ability to move to wave animation, but we don't want it to move right away. So what we do is we go ahead and create a transition, and then we select that transition, and we go down to the different options. Specifically, in this case, we're going to be going to advanced mode enabled. So auto makes it automatically move to the animation at the end, or whenever it comes in contact. Enabled just gives you the option to do so. So we're going to go ahead and make that transition back to the other one. And that transition, we're going to have it automatic, but we are going to have it set to only at the end. That way, when the animation is done, it just automatically dumps back into look around. So if we go ahead and hit play right here, it transitions to wave animation, and then once the wave animation is done, it transitions back. Now, a lot of issues that people have with the animation tree come down to these transitions. They tend to be very jerky, and it's because people don't give it enough fade time. So if you add 0.5 seconds, so this is half a second of blend time, watch the hands, how they move. See how they just smoothly blend back up? And now they just smoothly blend back. So this is how you soften up those transitions. Now you've also got X fade curve. So you can create a curve. So if you add a point like this, add a point like that, so that's your average sine curve, right? But we can make it a bit more something logarithmic. So if we go ahead and hit play, You see how it starts out very slow and then speeds up. If we set it to 1 second, it'll be a bit more noticeable. So it kind of slowly moves in and then it snaps to position. Now, I've never actually used curves because most of my animation blends are so subtle that I wouldn't notice it anyways. But in this case, I would specifically recommend using curves if you're doing something like a sliding door or something like that. So now we have this state machine. We can go ahead and worry about the blend. So something to be important with blends is it doesn't always make exact sense for the best result. So for example, in Hermit, I actually have like a axe swinging upper body blend, and I actually use the spine but not the chest. That gets the best results. Here that looks a little bit wonky. So I would highly suggest you fiddle around with this, see what works best based off of your rig. That being said, that's pretty much it for today. Next episode, we'll be going over how to actually call events and different properties within the animation tracks and animation playback, audio playback, and things like that. Call method I use liberally in all my animations pretty much. That's it for this week. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all back here next week. Have a wonderful day.